All right. So this is the next to last, the penultimate uh, session of the Creating a Culture of Spiritual Growth. And we'll sum everything up to the next week. Um, we'll, and this time this session is called I'm calling it individual, spontaneous, and voluntary. And this comes from a letter that Srila Prabhupada wrote to Karandara. He was one of the leaders in Los Angeles. And this is in December 22nd, 1972. And Prabhupada says was in Bombay at that time, Mumbai now. And so it's a very interesting letter. It covers several topics. We're going to focus on this particular one, where and this is just one little snippet from one sentence. It's a part of one sentence just to show where it comes from. He says, "Our leaders shall be careful not to kill the spirit of enthusiastic service, which is individual and spontaneous and voluntary." And when I heard that, it was kind of shocking. And if it hadn't come from Prabhupada, I might have thought it was some kind of heresy if somebody else had spoken of it that way. Do we usually hear people talk about bhakti like that? Um, I don't think so. I don't certainly usually. That's not a general way that people describe it. Usually, we're thinking more in terms of devotees are surrendered. They do what they're told. Obedient, compliant. We follow in the footsteps of everyone. You know, our predecessors and things like that. And even the Sanskrit word, for servant, kinkara, it means somebody who says what. Kim is what, and then someone who speaks or who does what. It says, what do you want? That's really what it asks. What do you want? Right? So a servant is one who asks, what do you want? So it doesn't sound very individual, voluntary or spontaneous. So it was kind of surprising to me to hear it described in that way. And it comes from Srila Prabhupada, and I think it really is something that we need to know, because we oftentimes think of it in other ways that aren't really very helpful. So I think it's one of the things that's not in our culture that should be, that was actually given by Srila Prabhupada. So we'll take a look a little bit more at what he says in this letter. And in this letter, he's he speaks about things in kind of from different points of view. We'll see that, and I'm trying to capture all the different points of view here to be faithful to him and not just cherry pick what I want to hear for the class. But and Prabhupada does this in general. If you read him, he'll look at things from different angles, and we really have to be mindful of that. Sometimes we think we can just copy any sentence that he speaks anywhere, and that will be, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Right? But there's a context things, and sometimes Prabhupada will look at it from a different perspective, and so we have to balance what he says, to understand really where he's coming from. And so, like, we'll see this here. So he says to Karandar Prabhu, he says that I am little observing now, especially in your country, that's the US, because Karandar was in Los Angeles, that our men are losing their enthusiasm for spreading on our programs of Krishna consciousness movement. He says, otherwise, why so many letters of problems are coming? Dissatisfied. So apparently he was receiving a lot of mail, especially from the US, that had complaints and problems, and people were expressing dissatisfaction. He says, why so many letters of problems are coming dissatisfied? Prabhupada says. He says, that is not a very good sign. And then he diagnoses the root of the problem. He says, the whole problem is they are not following the regulative principles. He says, that I can detect. He says, without this, enthusiasm will be lacking. And then he goes on and he says, so my point is that the regulative principles must be followed by everyone. Otherwise, their enthusiasm dwindles, and they again think of sex and become restless, and so many problems are there. And so if you just hear that part of it, you'll figure that he's instructing the leaders, because he makes it clear in other parts of the letter that it was also the leaders that were not following, as well as the rank and file. So you think that the thrust of his instruction was going to be, okay, it's time to really get serious. People have to, the leaders have to, clean up their own act, and they have to, really pressure the other devotees, to follow the proper rules and regulations, to put pressure on them to, get heavy and fix this problem. That's the kind of thrust you'd get. And I haven't taken this letter in order, but I'm kind of taking different parts of it that fit together for the purposes of our understanding. But then he says here, he says, of course, if new men are coming, they may not be expected immediately to take to our regulative principles cent per cent, 100%, right? Therefore, we should not be so anxious to induce them to live in the temple. Anyone who lives in the temple must agree to follow the rules and regulations without fail. So if some new man moves in with us, he may become discouraged if he is forced in this way. And he continues the same thought. He says, therefore, let them live outside and become gradually convinced in the class. So I guess he wants them to hear about Krishna consciousness, why they should accept some austerity. Then they will live with us out of their own accord and follow nicely everything. It is very difficult to give up very quickly so many bad habits as you have got in your country. He says, so educate them gradually, first with chanting. And do not be so much anxious to count up so many numbers of new devotees, if such devotees go away later, being too early forced. He says, I want to see a few sincere devotees, not many false devotees or pretenders. And so apparently he was seeing this as kind of even a more background diagnosis of why they were having the problem they were having, right? That people weren't following the regulations. Because back in those days in particular, still most of the devotees lived in temples. Joining the Krishna consciousness movement really meant for most people, to join the temple. And when they did, like everything changed for them. You not only had the 4 regulative principles and, chanting 16 rounds, but you're getting up early in the morning for Mangalarti. You changed the way you ate. You sat on the floor and ate with your fingers. You changed the way you had hygiene. You were sleeping on the floor. Everything you did was different. Taking off your shoes before you come in every place. Everything was different. Bowing down here, bowing down there. Your whole life was different. And so usually you had something called a bhakta program, and this continued, I guess in some places they still have it, right? But this, so you had somebody who was in charge of the new people, and basically it was like a boot camp. And you would be, supervised your whole time. You would be awakened in the morning, take your cold shower. You had a different way of dressing, right? You put your you had your, dhotis and kurtas and saris and all this kind of stuff that you weren't necessarily used to before, and tilak and the whole bit. And they would be supervised, boom, boom, boom. It's like a boot camp, where you don't have to think or do anything for yourself. You just have to follow the directions. And my wife, long after she'd been a devotee for many years, but she was living in an ashram, an all women's ashram. And there was a senior, a Prabhupada disciple woman who was running it. But she had a bullhorn, an actual, not like you see like with cheerleaders, but an actual, amplified bullhorn that you would, have batteries in that you'd use outside and wake people up in the morning with that. It's like heavy, and push, if you were, and there was like a real, a real feeling of pressure and shame if you weren't, just engaged in service all day, and, everything was tightly controlled. I remember when I first encountered devotees back in the 80s, they took me once or twice on trips to various temples. So I spent a few days with them and that kind of stuff. And I could feel that pressure And I was one sense I was attracted because I thought there's a lot of people are really serious about their spiritual life and really dedicated. But I could feel that there was the kind of pressure and shame on that if you were messing up even a little bit, you were in Maya, and you really have to be on the ball all the time. There's a heavy amount of pressure. And when I finally did move into the temple I moved into had a series of leaders kind of fall down and fall away, and people were really had lost a lot of enthusiasm. So that wasn't there. There wasn't a Bhakti program for me. And I really could have done most anything I wanted to, but I was there because I really wanted to be there. And I also, in the background, I felt the kind of pressure I had experienced years before that kept me doing it. But in some ways there was a feeling of pressure, that you're in Maya, you're not dedicated enough, you're not working hard enough, you're not doing things perfectly enough. And so you kind of got that feeling that that's what devotional service was. I think that's one of the things that caused us to think more in terms of the external than the internal. As long as you were doing all these things, you were good, and let me see. And then I even myself, when I moved into the temple, a couple of years afterwards, I'd only been in a couple of years, and we had some people start to join again. There was a period where people started to come, and so I was, some of the men, I was trying to guide them, and I had no idea what to do. And I was busy, so I couldn't supervise them all day, that kind of stuff. I couldn't give them that kind of pressure. But when some of them started to falter, started to lose enthusiasm, I didn't know what to do, except tell them, hey, you got to do this stuff. You're not coming in the morning. If you want to stay here, you have to do that. And really, what I should have been doing, I just asking what's going on. What's happening with you. What's what is there something discouraging you, or is your health okay? And really try to find out what's the root behind the problem. But we were really focused on just, if you went through the program, did the stuff you're supposed to do, you're fine. And if you're not, then you're not fine. Instead of trying to understand what the situation was there something we could do to help that? Was there some encouragement we could give, some support we could give? And I just we didn't have any conception of that. It was just, that's it. Now you change and you do these various things. And so people would feel forced. If they wanted to take up Krishna consciousness, they felt they had to do this kind of stuff. And if not, they're failures. If not, they're shame. And so it wasn't healthy. I think Prabhupada was understanding that even back then. I think he realized that's why some of that stuff was happening, that people were coming in precipitously, biting off more than they could really chew at that point, and having it not be. It was neither voluntary, spontaneous or individual. It was just, you come in, here's what you do. And so therefore they said they would become discouraged and maybe can go away because of being forced. It's a forced process. And so surprisingly, even to this day, of course, most people now, even initiated people, will never live in temples. But somehow some of that same kind of mood has percolated down generation after generation. And I still think when people come newly to Krishna consciousness, they oftentimes feel a pressure to take up more of the practice than they're really ready to do. That's somehow that will make them be more accepted. They will, people will treat them a lot differently if they're chanting more rounds, or if they're doing this or they're doing that kind of service to be praised. And if they're not doing so much, they'll kind of, oh, that's nice. Maybe you can, chant more rounds. Maybe you can do this. Just chant one more round a week. What are you doing with this? What are you doing? And, and people, of course, are trying to help. It's not that they're trying to be cruel, but they're trying to help. And they feel happy when somebody, is chanting more rounds or doing this, but they put a little bit of the culture of shame on them. Instead of trying to have them, deal with it in a more authentic way. So where they really want to do that, Some of the treatment they'll get will encourage them in one way. Oh, you're chanting, this many rounds. Oh, it's fantastic. Or, oh, you're chanting 1 round a day. Oh, that's nice. Not so enthusiastic. And so there's a way, or people will be pushed towards initiation. You have to have a spiritual master. You have to do that. And so I think that's part of what happens to us. What was happening to people at that time in the 72 was happened to people subsequently that causes us to get stuck in the Anishta Sadhana Bhakti stages is that we have been compelled to do things. And it hasn't come, we haven't been so authentic. The pressure and the is there. In order to be accepted and people to be pleased with you, you may want to try to bite off more than you can actually chew. And so I think some of this mood even carries through to this day. Or we'll talk right away about the 4 regulative principles, and people are new to it, And of course, it's nice. We're making a certain commitment, which is a nice thing. But that's not what people need to swallow first. We need to give them the Maha Mantra. We need to make them feel welcome. And we need to let them, if we look at this next section, where there's a couple of things here. He says, the point is to be engaged in doing something for Krishna. Never mind what is that job, but being so engaged in doing something very much satisfying to the devotee that he remains always enthusiastic. And here it says, he will automatically follow the regular principles because they are part of his occupational duty. By applying them practically as his occupational duty, he realizes the happy result of the regulative principles. So we'll take the bottom part first. Right, that somebody becomes enthusiastic about the regular principles when he sees he says the happy result, right? Because sometimes we take the regulative principles as like it's a question of sin and piety, and there is a moral component to them for sure. But the real point of them is that they help us in our Krishna consciousness. That when we want to try to connect with Krishna, we have the ways of doing service, the hearing and chanting, and remembering, and different types of seva that connects us with Krishna. And then, but our lifestyle also either makes it easier for us to connect with Krishna, or makes it easier for us to connect with our normal way of living, to be forgetful of Krishna. And so the 4 regular principles create an environment in which it's easier to be and remain connected with Krishna. They're really beneficial. And it's really helpful for people if it's not just a moral thing, right? Because if you're not doing it, you're kind of a moral failure, or that it's a good or bad thing, but really it's something that helps you in your devotional service, and you can feel that. And so if somebody can begin to do some of that, and to practice Krishna consciousness and do something of the regular principles, they will realize the happy result. They'll see how beneficial they are to your devotional service. And that becomes a real motivation then. When it's like, okay, you're kind of sinful over here, and now you're pious over here. I mean, it's not coming from the heart so much. And so if we really see the usefulness of them, then it becomes a lot more attractive to move in that direction. And then sometimes we make it sound like these things are the entryway to bhakti. Start here and then you can be a devotee, but actually it's you start chanting, you start doing service, and then these things are helpful things that can help you along the way. So you begin, as Prabhupada says, you start them with chanting, start them with hearing, start them with service. And that becomes a different world. And then up here, it's interesting what he says here. He says, the point is to be engaged in doing something for Krishna. Never mind what is that job, but being so engaged in doing something very much satisfying to the devotee. Now, this is that he remains always enthusiastic. All right. Because if you read, most of the time you hear, right, that we're supposed to be satisfying Krishna. That devotional service is meant to satisfy Krishna. And our own satisfaction isn't very important. But where Prabhupada is talking, I think here's Prabhupada speaking of the individual part, right? Because also when people were joining temples, or just even in general, there's certain types of services that are available and expected, and people aren't usually asked, hey, what do you like to do? What are you good at? What's this? How would how are there ways that we can engage what your talents and skills and likes in Krishna consciousness? Because it's true, at the advanced stages of Krishna consciousness, one is so in love with Krishna that Krishna's pleasure is the only thing that's important to you. Radharani, says that you're my worshipable Lord, the Lord of my life unconditionally. You can do whatever you want. It doesn't matter. I only want your happiness. But we're coming into Krishna consciousness. We're trying to move from the unsteady devotional service level to the steady one. And so it's really helpful in many ways if somebody can do something that actually they like and are good at, and then do that in such a way that's pleasing to Krishna. All right. So, because that's service, that's pleasing Krishna with that. But otherwise, if you have to do something you dislike and then make it also pleasing to Krishna. So so first of all, we have a tendency to want to please ourselves. That's our natural tendency. So we're trying to change that to have our actions please Krishna. So that's something we have to work with. And then if we also have to do something unpleasant to us in order to do that, that's a double obstacle. Right? Where if we can take something that we're good at, something we're inclined to, something that we're able to do, something we would ordinarily enjoy, and then make that about Krishna, it's a much smoother transition. You don't have to have both obstacles. Okay, don't think of yourself, think of Krishna, and then now do something that you find unpleasant. So it's the Prabhupada talks about dovetailing. Take what you do and do it for Krishna. And so here I think Prabhupada is talking a little bit about this. It doesn't matter what is that job. You'll hear a lot if you hear Prabhupada's conversations and sometimes questions and stuff that devotees oftentimes ask Prabhupada, what is the service that's most pleasing to you? And so sometimes he would kind of dodge it and say, just whatever he just wants everybody to advance. But a lot of times in the history of the movement, there was an emphasis on book distribution or an emphasis on Harinams, very things like that. And so sometimes people would feel compelled, or if somebody maybe really wanted to please Prabhupada the most and was willing to sacrifice, that can be a healthy thing. But a lot of times people were either feeling pressured to do that, or they wanted to be the one who pleases Prabhupada the most. Right? There's a difference between wanting to please Prabhupada the most or be the one that there's an egoistic part of that. And so it hasn't usually been that common to really try to take people and say, look, what do you do? What do you like to do? Start this way. You just do it for Krishna now. And Prabhupada talks about that in various different places, but that somehow wasn't oftentimes institutionalized. So the individual part partially means that, as you're trying to come to Krishna consciousness, do some of the things that you're good at, that you have interest in, have some skills at, and then make it be about Krishna. Then you can focus just about the part of pleasing Krishna instead of pleasing yourself, instead of also trying to swallow doing something that's unpleasant. As the Krishna consciousness grows, it becomes easier to serve in various ways. But then it can leave a bad taste in your mouth. So now if we deal with people, we should ask them. And I mean, the other thing is it's useful because in our communities and stuff, sometimes we don't even know. We need stuff that people in our communities can help us with, but we don't ask for it. We don't know enough about what people can do and like to do. And so sometimes we're missing out on resources, by just having people do the same, serve out in the Sunday feast or wash pots or do different kinds of things like that. It's fine. All those services are great. But what about if somebody has some other talent or skills that actually we can use? Okay. So anyway, so the idea, right, is that the four regulative principles, should be something that people can have some experience of their value before they want to try to take them up. They take them up as they experience a little bit. It's a little more gradual process. And that goes to what we've been talking about, that bhakti is so much an internal process. And so if we're trying to act in ways that go far beyond our internal feelings towards Krishna, it's probably not going to last. We're going to lose enthusiasm and become discouraged, maybe go away, as Prabhupada said. So it's really important that that heart connection be there. And therefore, then we want to do something for Krishna. We see the importance of it. Okay, so let's go on a little bit further. And so then here's the whole full sentence there. He says, so the future of this Krishna conscious movement is very bright. So long the managers remain vigilant that 16 rounds are being chanted by everyone without fail, that they are all rising before 4 morning, attending Mangal Arati. Our leaders shall be careful not to kill the spirit of enthusiasm. This is interesting, right? Our leaders shall not careful not to kill the spirit of enthusiastic service, which is individual and spontaneous and voluntary. He puts those two things right together in the same sentence, that they have to be vigilant that people are following the process if they're in the temple, but in such a way that they don't kill the spirit of enthusiastic service, which is individual and spontaneous and voluntary. That's what allows it to happen. You see, so it's not a question of putting more pressure on, right? But providing an appropriate mood. And he talks a little bit. We'll talk a little bit about what he means by that. But that so again, you look at that first part. So yeah, they have to be vigilant. So that means they're there with the bullhorn, waking you up. The megaphone in the morning at 4 o'clock. But not. They want to. You should create an environment and have people have the right mindsets. They want to do that. Not that you put the heavy pressure on them, but they want to. Otherwise, why are they there? Right? So if it's just forced, then then there's nothing in the heart. Then it just becomes, oh, this is painful, this is painful, this is painful, this is painful, and you can't maintain any enthusiasm that way. So here's what he says about it. He explains what he means by what the managers should do. He says they should try always to generate some atmosphere of fresh challenge to the devotees, so that they will agree enthusiastically to rise and meet it. Agree, isn't it interesting? Agree enthusiastically to rise and meet it. Again, it's not heavy. We're not going to force you or really try to pressure you, push you. That is the art of management, he says, to draw out spontaneous, loving spirit of sacrificing some energy for Krishna. He says, there must be always some tapasya, strictly observing the regular principles. He says, the Krishna conscious movement must be always a challenge, a great achievement to be gained by voluntary desire to do it. And that will keep it healthy. So whatever is happening, it should be something that brings some enthusiasm to people, where they want to do, and they want to do the whatever the observing the regular principles. They want to do that because they see the value in it. They've experienced the value of Krishna consciousness, and so they're excited. They enthusiastically, they agree enthusiastically to do it. Not that there's this heavy pressure and shame. Right? The pressure and shame is really a negative thing. And people are shamed into doing things. It's not bhakti, because it's only external. The internal part is being severely compromised. And if people are struggling, hey, you can find ways to help them, perhaps. There may be, because that happens. People will go through things and says, no, that's wrong. You have to do this. If you want to be a devotee, you have to do this. It locks people's shame in there. People can't work through anything. So the idea is to try to lead people to want to agree enthusiastically. He says, agree enthusiastically to draw out spontaneous loving spirit of sacrificing some energy for Krishna. There's a voluntary desire to do it. So, we've talked about this a lot before, that Krishna, he wants a genuine connection with us. That he doesn't need us to do anything. He doesn't need us to behave in a certain way. He doesn't need us to do any particular service. He's not in need of anything. With like he tells Arjuna, a tiny little bit of myself creates all the universes. Just as Mahavishnu, as a tiny part of himself, creates all the material universes, not just this universe, but all the material universes. And so there's nothing he's lacking. He doesn't need us for any of us, any purpose of his own. And he doesn't get any kind of a, ego boost by having people obey him. Because I mean, he can create people that obey him. He can force us to do it. He can do it to somebody. It doesn't matter. He's everything. Why does he? He doesn't have an ego problem. So it's not like that. Like I'm going to punish you if you don't listen to me, and I'll be happy when you bow down to me. Like he needs a boost in his ego. It just doesn't happen that way. And so what Krishna has us here for is he wants a genuine connection. He doesn't want to be alone. He wants to be able to love and be loved. And he wants us to love it, to have the same. And so for that, for there to be a real connection, a real relationship of any kind, there has to be authenticity. It can't be forced. You can't force somebody to be your friend or to love you or to like you. And so a lot of people who are either, they're wealthy or famous or something like that, they feel very alone because they're very cognizant of how people treat them in certain ways, pretend to be their friend, pretend to really care about them because of wanting something from them. That they don't have real friends. It's hard for them to have real connections because people want something from them. So Krishna wants it to be authentic, not because here I am, I'm God, I'm all powerful, and you're not. Therefore, do what I say. That's not a real connection. So authenticity is huge to Krishna. He wants us not to serve him, but to also want to serve him. Not just be connected with him, but just to want to be connected with him. It has to be these things. It has to be voluntary. And we see even from the spiritual world, the devotees are so different. There's so many different types of devotees. So he likes also the individuality, even in the liberated state. We're talking more now about how we're trying to come to the stage of Nishtha, so to pass through this unsteady devotional service, how it can help us to use our talents and inclinations in that way. But even in the liberated stage, there's so many different varieties of devotees. They all have different personalities. So Krishna appreciates that. He likes the individuality of the service, of the connection, different types of connections. He likes that. And then he wants it to be enthusiastically agreed to. He wants us to come to him. Yes, we want to do this, Krishna. That's what he wants. And so if we're acting in ways that don't match up with our real feelings, then it's like Prabhupada says, kind of pretending, or it's just you're not being who you really are, so you can't sustain that. It's not so pleasing to Krishna, and it's certainly not useful to yourself. Okay, so let's talk a little bit here. He says, even this is interesting here, even mechanically following, and if he gets gradually understanding from the class, he will come to the point of spontaneous enthusiasm. So he says, even if somebody does just try it, even mechanically, he says, if they learn more, right, understand more about Krishna, understand more about bhakti, he says, then they may also come to the point of spontaneous enthusiasm. We're going to talk about the spontaneous part. This spontaneous loving devotional service is not so easy matter, he says. But if one simply sticks strictly to the rules and regulations, like rising early, chanting 16 rounds, chanting Gayatri, keeping always clean, then his enthusiasm will grow more and more. And if there is also patience and determination, this is interesting what he says, one day he will come to the platform of spontaneous devotion, then his life will be perfect. So I want to talk a little bit about the spontaneous part. And here in, this is interesting, in the Nectar of Devotion, in chapter 2, the first stages of devotion, Prabhupada has this. It's a very interesting little passage here. I don't hear that much more of these kind of things in Prabhupada's writing that I notice. He says, for example, a person engaged in devotional service may be ordered to rise early in the morning and offer arati, which is a form of deity worship. In the beginning, by the order of his spiritual master, one rises early in the morning and offers arati. But then he develops real attachment. When he gets this attachment, he automatically tries to decorate the deity and prepare different kinds of dresses and thinks of different plans to execute his devotional service nicely. Although it is within the category of practice, this offering of loving service is spontaneous. So this is what he means, right? That there's a greater enthusiasm that comes. So we're supposed to have some level of enthusiasm for devotional service, but then there comes a point where this becomes really, really intense and more intense enthusiasm. And the devotion then just comes, like I said, it's spontaneous. So Prabhupada, it's a little confusing. In the paragraph before, he talks about that there's Vaidhi Bhakti and there's Raganuga Bhakti. But the Raganuga Bhakti is a little specialized. It says that when one comes to a high level of sadhana, that one can begin to realize, this is usually at the stage of asakti, just the stage just before bhava, that one can actually understand, get a really reliable intuition, not just you come up with this yourself and it sounds good to you, but you really get a very profound intuition of your eternal relationship with Krishna. You're a cowherd boy, you're a gopi, you're an older person that's like a parent to Krishna, you're a servant of Krishna. And then at that point, this is one will meditate on or hear about one of the perfect, they're called Ragatmaka, eternal associates of Krishna, like Mother Yashoda, one of the gopis, some of Krishna's friends, and hear about their devotion, hear about their activities, and begin to try to take on that mood. That's a very specialized thing. But here Prabhupada is talking about something, spontaneity coming earlier than that stage. Right, that we're not. He's not talking. He's just talking about trying to decorate the deity and prepare different kinds of dresses and things differently, of different plans to execute his devotional service nicely. It's just a greater level of enthusiasm, and so from that, to me, it's we've been talking about this a little bit. I want to talk a little bit more about it. That I think this really also comes from the internal part. What is our motivation? Why are we serving Krishna? What do we think of Krishna? And especially if we're coming more from a position where we're thinking of trying to upgrade our existence, as one of the things that that we're taught is that this world is, we've been in this world for so many births. We've never found satisfaction here. There's always birth, death, old age, and disease, and nobody's ever fully happy here. And yet there's another world, right, where there's it's existence, knowledge, and bliss, where we can be with Krishna and serve Krishna eternally and be truly happy. If we, if we go through the whole process, that can happen to us. And so, for one thing, that's a lot about us, and it's also something that's coming in the future. And so there can be enthusiasm with that. But when you're thinking that I'm doing something to attain something that's way in the future, it's more of a discipline. It's not so spontaneous. Right? You may do this because you convince yourself this is worth it. It's a really good thing. It's going to upgrade my existence, sometime in the future. And so let me do this. So you do it voluntarily. Okay. You may do it even with some enthusiasm, but it's not really spontaneous. You have to remind yourself of the goal, and that the goal may be attained at some later date, and you may have to be very patient in order to wait for that to happen. But when we begin to understand how Krishna is with us right now. He's present with us. He's in the heart. He's not waiting for us to prove ourselves to him. He already cares for us deeply. That we, that this is something that's already there. Even while we're here in this material world, we have Krishna who's, who's reaching out to us, who's with us in the heart right now, who's guiding us, who's present in the name, and who sees value in us. So this is something that we have right now. It's not something in the future. And it's not something that we have to work really hard to prove ourselves to Krishna before Krishna says, okay, I'll take you to the spiritual world. But Krishna already cares for us more than we care about him. And if we can begin to understand the kindness and some of the sweetness of Krishna, not just the power, but the sweetness of Krishna and his kindness and his open-heartedness and the fact that he's here right now with us, then I think our heart opens a little more. So we begin to feel, and Krishna loves us warts and all, that our heart can be a little softened, and we can start to feel really grateful to Krishna and feel really, whether it's in this lifetime or another lifetime, whenever we go back, but Krishna's here with us now. He's here with us now. He looks through all of our faults. He's going to help us. He's our eternal friend. He says the well-wisher of all, embodied entities. And if we can appreciate that and appreciate a little bit about what it means, right, for such a being to want to be connected with us. Right? There's being humiliated and being humbled, and those are two different things. Humiliated is when you feel really bad about yourself. You've been proud and you feel really bad, then you're humiliated. But being humbled means you've received something that you could not possibly deserve. So when we're kind of doing sadhana, thinking that we're thinking a lot of times we can earn our way back to Godhead. And so that upgrade will be, worth all the hard work we have. But here, if we really understand the situation, we have Krishna who cares about us right now. That is a priceless thing. That we could never earn. It comes from Krishna's heart. And we could never deserve it. But we have it. And so in that case, there should be this outpouring of gratitude. The heart should soften. It really should. If we have some idea of who Krishna is, how wonderful it is that that he's made a situation where he wants to be related with us. There's that story of, I think, Mukunda, one of Lord Chaitanya's, followers who Lord Chaitanya banished him. He was hearing the Bhagavatam from Mayavadis. He didn't really mean any harm, but anyway, this is more of a Leela. And Lord Chaitanya said, he can't come here anymore. And all the other devotees were begging him, don't forgive him, he didn't mean any harm, come. And they kept bothering Lord Chaitanya so much that he was not hearing it. Finally, he says, if you ask me again, I'm leaving this place. So then they were terrified. And then he said, finally, okay, you tell him. Well, I can't remember what it was, thousands and thousands of lifetimes. He says, after thousands of lifetimes, he will come back to me. He will see me again. But not until so many thousands of lifetimes pass. And so they were really discouraged, and they went and told Mukunda the bad news. Lord Chaitanya says it's going to be thousands and thousands of lifetimes before you see him again. And when he heard those words, he started to dance in ecstasy. He says, I will get. So this is how valuable, how extraordinary the association of 10 million lifetimes. So it's like we think, oh, terrible, right? But it's not. He said, I will get. So even after all that time, it's so joyful for him, because we can't even begin to realize what it is to have someone like Krishna and to be connected with such a being. It's utterly mind-blowing. So this should make us feel like And it's not just like it's going to be something in the future for us. We're connected with him through chanting. We're connected with the service. He's there in the form of the deity. We can begin to feel that. And so there should be, this just desire to want to do something in return. I can't earn it. I can't deserve it. I can't pay it back, but I can do something. At least let me do something for Krishna. This is the beginning of the spontaneity to the service. You want to do whatever you can. When we're trying to become great enough to go back to Godhead, right? When we're trying to distinguish ourselves, this is like the egoistic path. When we're trying to get bigger and greater and more accomplished, so we deserve it, the heart stays hard, and all you can do is hope that your value of your long-term goal is valuable enough, and your good feeling about yourself for becoming better and better and better carries you along. But for us, our ego should just be really demolished by the fact that Krishna is so wonderful. And in that kind of emptiness, with the empty space when the ego goes down, comes this gratitude and this desire to reciprocate. Becomes a personal thing instead of this idea. I'm going to grow and grow. Grow. It says, in the Shikshasana, that every time Lord Chaitanya was experiencing a higher level of devotion, he was becoming more humble, becoming more meek, becoming more humble. So advancement on our side is getting smaller. Our ego's getting smaller. Our false ego's getting smaller. Not for us trying to become greater. And then just a couple of things to consider. That as souls, we have some power. Compared to Krishna, we're tiny. But I like this thing Prabhupada says, just like fire and spark of fire. A spark, when it is with the fire, it is bright fire. But as soon as it goes out of the fire, it extinguishes. But the big fire never extinguishes. Similarly, you are not that big fire. You are that small spark of fire. You have fallen down. Therefore, you are not God. Now you have to raise yourself again to the fire. You will be again blazing spark. Right? So we're a tiny little angsha of Krishna. Right? It's higher energy. So as we say, quantitatively, we're tiny compared to Krishna. Right? But we're a tiny bit of something really powerful, fire. And when we come close to Krishna again, it says we shine brightly. There's some, we're by nature we have this enthusiasm in this life that we come alive. And then Prabhupada in this verse here, Srimad Bhagavatam 1-22, Ato vai kavayo nityam bhaktim paramaya muda vasudevi bhagavati kurvantyatma prasadanim. Certainly, therefore, since time immemorial, all transcendentalists have been rendering devotional service to Lord Krishna, the personality of Godhead, with great delight, because such devotional service is enlivening to the self. Right? So when we think of ourselves as powerless, this is more of thinking of our ego power, right? But actually, when we become more, when the false ego goes down, soul comes alive. Bhakti is supposed to make the soul come alive. Prabhupada says that the Srimad Bhagavatam is the culture of the soul proper. Begin to awake, devotional service begins to awaken ourselves, bring us the spark, which is now just like an ember, comes close again to the fire and starts to shine. It's Atma Prasadam. It makes the self come alive. If it's done properly, if it's done authentically, our soul comes alive. It's alive, but we become aware of it. Now it's like sleeping. Now we're coming alive. And so service is something that comes natural to us. That's another way it's spontaneous. It awakens us. That's what we really are meant to live for. And so we actually, in some sense, have a lot more. We emphasize especially our weakness because we're taking shelter of Krishna in many ways. But by nature, we have power. We're going to talk about that a little bit next time, about how Krishna wants us Krishna doesn't want to control everything. Krishna wants a real, authentic relationship. And we're going to call that he wants us, he has a notion of a great adventure for us. We're going to participate with him in a great adventure. So he wants us also to have some power, some abilities. So we have that. We have the ability, when the soul is awakened to compared to Krishna, no, we're very small. But compared to anything material, we have some internal power that the ember can become a spark again. That's why it must be joyful. All right, we're went a little bit longer than I would have preferred. So anyways, let's go with the any comments or questions that you might have at this time. Anything?
Hare Krishna, Giri.
Hare Krishna, Sam.
dear devotees. Yeah, I really like this lecture because I remember, like, for me, it all started, like, I remember when I was first introduced to Krishna consciousness, I like first read about the regulated principles. They seemed like really far and distant and just like unattainable. And I remember I had asked my friend because I was enthusiastic to be a part of like the Hare Krishna movement and start practicing, but I was nowhere near being able to like accomplish the regulated principles. Just I wasn't at that point in my life yet. And so I asked him, I was like, is it possible to like be Krishna conscious and not do the regulated principles? And he was like, yes. So I tried that and it really just it didn't really work. Like, if I'm being honest, it was not, it was very difficult. There was a lot of like unsteady chanting and like occasional listening. But when I moved from Baltimore to College Park and I made the decision that I wanted to take, my spiritual life like really seriously and practice Hare Krishna like sincerely. And when I took up bhakti, it became a lot easier to practice those regulated principles. And now it's just like I don't even really think about it. It's just like a part of my life, you know, and it's really cleared the way for me to just enjoy the service. And so like for me, I'm always engaged in some sort of service, whether it's like preaching or it's like reading, listening, hearing, chanting, or I'm always engaged in service. And then like even at the temple, I'm usually in the kitchen. And then at Baltimore Temple, I work in the garden and I do book distribution. So it's like I remember when I first started working in the kitchen at Temple, it was like, oh man, this is so much work. But now it's to the point where I'm just like, I can't wait to wash these dishes for Krishna and the dear devotees. Like I get this opportunity to wash all these beautiful dishes that are going to be used to cook for the nice devotees so they can eat nice Krishna prasadam. And like my mood around that service has changed completely. So it's much more favorable. And it's like even with other services, at first it was like, oh, this is kind of cumbersome. But when you just think about it, that you're not doing it for you, you're doing it for Krishna. And, as devotees, it's so important. Like, we want to make Krishna happy, right? That's the whole point of doing this bhakti. So it's really nice. Um, it's really nice. And there's like, it's just a really nice feeling. And it's nice to be able to engage in that type of service because you're not only like advancing yourself on the path of bhakti, but you're doing something nice for Krishna. So yeah.
Nice. Thanks, Sam. Nitya Kishori, Mataji, I see you have your hand up. Why don't you come ahead?
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Okay, then with pranams. Thank you so much for the class. It just got me thinking. I'm just wondering, like, for example, if you're mentoring or if you are working with, newer devotees and there's, maybe like a group of 10 newer devotees that you're working with, like, is there a difference in how to approach these particular, you know, I guess, you know, as far as like what you like to do, you know, the individuality, the spontaneous, the volunteer, like how would you do that in a group setting versus obviously individually, we can talk to them and work with them and stuff like that. But is there anything we could do like in a group setting or like, you know, within your temple congregation to try to, you know, instill some of these like following regulative principles, chanting 16 rounds, going to Mangalarati, all these kind of things. But, or does it have to be just done in an individual kind of more
Well,
mentoring aspect?
Well, I just, that's the one thing I would always encourage is have people be authentic.
Hmm.
And so, you know, if they're, we don't want to pressure them to, like I said, Prabhupada was talking about people, you know, living in the temple, you know, where you had to enforce the 4 regulative principles. Otherwise, he was saying that people should be able to take them up gradually. You know, they shouldn't be forced. Otherwise, they might go away, you know, because their heart's not in it. They're feeling that they'll be accepted. People will praise them for doing it, right? Or they'll be accepted, but they don't really feel it yet, you know? So the real thing that Krishna wants is authenticity.
Okay.
And so people need to be engaged to the extent that they really want to. And they, you know, the regular principle should be something that they feel benefit them. Like they, you know, now they're like Sam said, okay, maybe he was chanting and stuff and it wasn't very steady. And he found that when he took them up, it helped him to be more steady. So the regular principles are something that are helpful to devotional service. But if we try to impose them, or we make the people feel shame about not following them, then you're going to get somebody who's, like Prabhupada says, is pretending. That you force people to be pretenders rather than he said that you should see the value in them. They should have a chance to see the value in them. Because remember, we have this internal component. Devotional service is not just the external, it's the anukulyena. And so even if I do a very good job, I have a bhakti leader, you know, down my throat. I'm chanting 16 rounds, I'm getting up, I'm doing all the things, you know, but inside I'm going, ah. It's not devotion. It's not devotion, it's pretending. Right. So there's real things we want to really make have some desire to be connected with Krishna. We should see the value of the devotional service and see then the value of the devotional principles. We should see the value and really desire to take initiation. But just the doing of the things when disconnected from the heart, they're not really even devotional service anymore, and people will go away. People will lose enthusiasm and get stuck. So you really have to try to guide them so that they see the value in it. They try it, they see the value. And when people see the value, then they'll see, well, how can I maximize that value? Right? If something enters into your life that you see as valuable, we'll see, what can I do to increase that value? And then they'll say, okay, maybe I can do some more service. Maybe I can chant more. Maybe I'll try this regular principle. You know, maybe something that can handle. And then when that works and you see some value from it, it encourages you to do more. So it becomes authentic. So we have a tendency, I think, to focus too much on the outside. And we think if somebody's chanting 16 rounds, if they're following the 4 regular principles, they're fine. And we don't talk about what's in your heart. And so I think we really have to get people so they feel like they're authentically connected, not that they feel pressured to do it, you know. And so, and see how they can, how do you feel about Krishna? You know, what's happening when you chant Hare Krishna, you know, what is this, you know? And sometimes we can do it kind of unconsciously. We can be like somebody, I'm chanting so many rounds, and oh, that's so wonderful. And then somebody else says, well, you know, I'm chanting sometimes. We go, oh, okay, that's nice. Maybe you can chant 1 more round a week. Right. And we're kind of saying is like, you're not doing very well. And people want your approval, you know. And so somehow we have to be happy when they're somehow connected, and we can be helpful in any way we can. But we have a tendency that always, because we can see the external better than we can see in people's hearts. And so we tend to focus on that. That's the success. Like he was saying, don't bring so many people in just to make more devotees when they may not end up being sincere, you know. But to make sure whatever stage they're in, it's authentic. They really mean that. They have faith in that. I think that puts them on such a solid ground. And otherwise we get stuck in that same kind of spot. If we try to push ourselves ahead of where we really are. then we have trouble afterwards trying to sort that out.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. I find like some people, like when we're trying to talk to them and help them and whatever, Bhakti rickshaws, whatever is going on, or at the temple and stuff like that. Like there are some individuals who I feel like they're just kind of like hesitant to take the next step.
Mhm.
Like, just to try to encourage them to take the next step and then see how they feel at that next step, right? Like sometimes they might have certain fears or something that might be like preventing them and
Mhm.
stuff, but that's
And
an
then
individual,
you can talk about that to them,
right?
and make it clear to that whatever step they're on, this is wonderful, right? Because already their life, if they have made any step towards Krishna, it's already the most successful lifetime they've ever had.
Yes.
And so we should make that's
Yeah.
really a good thing. This is really wonderful. And you want to have them be able to share with you, what's going on with them. And if you find out, what a doubt is or what a problem is that you can help with, you can try to help with that.
Yeah.
But we shouldn't be worried. We shouldn't be worried so much about what step they're on, because we sometimes then put pressure on them in some way. But,
Yeah.
but we see what we can do to facilitate them and to help them and to encourage them in their heart, more in their heart than anything else,
Yes. Yes.
I think that's,
Yeah.
we really have to start to get more a little bit internal with them like that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Because we're trying to be helpful, but sometimes I think we unintentionally actually, put things on people that will at one point in the future pay bad dividends.
Yeah. No, I agree. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Anyone else? We're a little past 8, so don't want to keep you too long either. But, don't want to cut anybody off.
Haribo.
Hare Krishna. Prabhu.
Haribo. Do you want to read the last part of the letter? I thought that was also really, for leaders to not become complacent and, do you have that?
I didn't put that because that was more for the organization, and I'm kind of dealing more with what we can do individually. There was part of that letter was a response to the Kurandar had and others had wanted to especially centralize all the finances. They wanted to have all the money go to one centralized location and it would be distributed every place else. And Prabhupada said that he wanted to have like the BBT to centrally organize book production and organization, but he didn't want to have bureaucracy. He didn't want to have people being. He said that one people, then somebody's successful and everybody kind of feeds off them. So he said he wanted people to be independently thoughtful and competent at the local level. He wanted people to be able to do this. There was a big organizational thing in that letter as well. I didn't want to focus so much on that just because none of us have much say in that. I wanted to take away from what we can do with our personal lives. But there is, I would, encourage you to read that letter. If you go to the Vedabase online and you use the search function, you just have to you just put fresh challenge and it'll get you right to that letter. So Prabhupada talks about that, how he didn't want people to have everything to be centralized and be a bureaucratic thing. He said he wanted people to individually incorporate, be able to do that, to learn how to be incorporated as a 501c3 and how to manage finances locally. He said he wanted people to become an expert at a local level and be able to do things and not have everything be so centralized. And he wanted people to be independently thoughtful in these kinds of things. So that he really had that in mind. And he is specifically speaking about the finances, but he was also saying, more otherwise, because they were going really, they wanted to have everybody send all their money, I guess, to one location and they would disperse it from there. And Prabhupada said, the people will just be beggars. He said, then some people are doing nicely and then they'll just be beggars. Other people that aren't doing very well. So he wanted to have individual responsibility, individual competency at the local level. And so that was part of that. I was kind of focusing for our purposes on the individual, voluntary, and spontaneous. That's why we didn't go there so much today.
Yeah, let me just read the last, I have the letter here, kind of the last thing. That is the art of management, to draw out spontaneous loving spirit of sacrificing some energy for Krishna. But where are so many expert managers? All of us should become expert managers and preachers. We should not be very much after comforts and become complacent or self-contented. There must always be some tapasya, strictly observing the regular principles. Krishna consciousness movement must always be a challenge, a great achievement to be gained by voluntary desire to do it, and that will keep it healthy. So you big managers now try to train up more and more competent preachers and managers like yourselves. Forget this centralizing and bureaucracy. Hoping this meets you in good health, your ever well wisher, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada.
Yeah, we read portions of that part that were, relevant, particularly for I didn't do the whole part, but I did quite a bit of that part was there. Yeah, to have the fresh challenge and that kind of stuff I did. But yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Wonderful presentation. Thank you.
but yeah, it's an really interesting letter. It's worth reading all the way through. I said database online, search function, in quotations, fresh challenge. And it'll get right, boom, that's the first hit. It'll be this little Karundar. That's how I found it. It was quick, It's worth reading the whole thing.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Well, next time is the last of them. I'm going to try to pull things together. And we won't be so much a fresh topic as trying to kind of pull things together as much as possible. But I think I'm going to call it the Great Adventure. I think Krishna is calling us to have a great adventure, an eternal and great adventure. That's the purpose of him. So I'm going to, and hopefully we can show how all the things we've talked about kind of fit into that notion. So, all right. Thank you so much for taking some time this Saturday evening. We'll conclude next week. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Giri. Hare Krishna.
Hare
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, dear devotees.